Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 3D Hydrography Program for the Nation Interest Group meeting. It's nice to have you all with us. As most of you are aware, NSGIC, this is a NSGIC USGS cooperative project to engage states and other partners in modernizing national hydrography by deriving new data from 3DHP data. A little bit of an update here. We are in a new project year. We're very excited. Hats off to Lindsay and John with the NSGIC staff and Sue and Steve with the USGS staff for getting us back online. The project year runs January through December of this year, so we're aligned with the calendar year. And this is the third of 4 potential years for the project. So thanks for joining us on this kickoff meeting. As most of you know, we occasionally hold these interest group meetings in place of the monthly 3DHP forums, and that's going to happen 2 to 3 times a year. And if you have things that you would like to present to either the interest group, or if you have a specific project you'd like to present as a forum presentation, please contact me, and we'd like to engage you in that process. Today, we're going to hear from USGS. They're going to give us a brief 3DHP update. Then we're going to talk about culvert mapping from both USGS and NSGIC activities that are going on. Then just a brief overview of what's happening at the NSGIC mid-year meeting. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Steve Achel with USGS. Steve, are you on the line?
I am, present.
Excellent, present and accounted for.
I'm just going to report a couple updates from the program. First off, we did close submission of markups on November 30th. Thanks to everybody got those in. We got about 1,700, a little more than 1,700 in the queue as of the end of December, I believe. Those numbers come from. 1,100 of them have been reviewed and are going to editing. 178 are still in review, and there are 412 that we still need to look at. That's actually a fairly typical kind of quarterly editing load. So that's not. We were a little concerned there might be a giant wave of markups coming in, and that's pretty much our steady pace. We are working on closing NHD editing. Some of the editors on the call may have already gotten a notice that your account's been closed down, or at least editing privileges have been closed down. We did grant a few extensions for people that had ongoing projects and needed a little bit more time to get whatever it was closed up, finished off, turned in. But everything will close down for external editing March 31st. We really need to hit that in part because of the next point here, which is in bold. And that is, after some discussions, we're actually going to migrate the most of the NHD flow lines and water body features from the existing 24K NHD into 3DHP. There was we originally proposed using just kind of a skeleton network to connect areas that had EDH. We're going to migrate the whole NHD, or about 95% of the NHD features, over to 3DHP. And they will be present. They will have names and IDs. They obviously won't be Z enabled. They won't have Z values. And so there's some things they won't be able to do, and they won't have catchments starting out, but they'll be there for reference. And that transfer includes basically all the NHD flow lines except the coastline feature. Most of the water body features, notably, swamp, marsh, ice mass, and playa, are not getting migrated. And then just a few of the point features. Most of the point features will end up becoming events. These are we're really limited to really stopping with the point features that are hydrologic, not sort of observing or interacting with the hydrologic system. So sinks and springs are good. Things like dams, you know, NID has that kind of stuff. And we'll go from there. But you know, to do that, we really do need to have like a finished version of the NHD to migrate. And so this went from being kind of a parallel, closing down the NHD, starting up 3DHP, to we need to close down the NHD, do a couple things, and stand up 3DHP. So it'll be makes it more of a sequential thing, which changes some of the demands a little bit.
Is being recorded.
And I don't know if I'm on or not.
Steve, did you want me to go to the next slide?
Yeah, I guess my connection seemed to have dropped there for a minute, but I guess I'm back.
We didn't lose you.
Weird. It logged me out and logged me right back in. So by technology at its best, I guess. All right, and then yeah, next slide, please. Okay, and just a couple of events coming up here. The actual temporal kind of events, not linear events. We have 3DHP will be in the Advanced Water Mapping Analytics session at the Esri Fed UC coming up next month. It's 11 a.m. on the 8th. I think that's a Wednesday. And then we have the Hydrography Community Call coming up next week on the 24th, where we'll talk about kind of at least the high level concepts of the data model, including this main stems concept, which is fairly important to the future of linear referencing as we move away from reach codes. So I guess I'd encourage folks to tune into that and start to learn about those things. And with that, that's my report.
Great. Do we have any questions for Steve?
Hey, Steve, this is Phil.
Hey, Phil.
Hey. So you're migrating them in 2D, or are they going to be 3D features with like a zero elevation, or what exactly?
I think they'll actually be, I think they'll be 3D features with a zero elevation.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if that answer really matters to you, send me an email and we'll confirm that.
No, I was just curious. That's
Yeah,
a good answer. That's a good answer.
Well, I mean, again, don't build anything around that unless, like, if you're going to start building anything around it, let me know. All right,
okay.
And we'll make sure that's right, and we're that isn't a technical detail that I've glossed over.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any
Hey,
other
Steve,
questions? Oh, go ahead.
Hey, Linda, Sean Vaughn here.
Hey, Sean.
Hey, Steve, I have a question. Could you go back to the previous slide? I believe a bullet caught my eye regarding features from an HD being incorporated into 3DHP.
Mm-hmm.
If that helps. Now I'm wondering if did you already go back to that slide?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, okay. So sorry, folks, I have a lag here. I have another PC doing a system update, and it's eating up my bandwidth.
Do you remember what the question might be,
Yep,
Sean?
right.
There were three.
I see it now. Thank you. Right here, most NHD flow lines and water body features will be transferred to 3DHP, about 90% of all NHD features.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that just, I might be coming into this late, but has there been any thought into considering incorporation of all of that line work, like in the state of Minnesota, for example? We have line work that is tremendously old and has a horrible representation of the hydrology of the landscape because it comes from the 60s, which had influence from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s.
You're not alone.
I wanted to see, my dream was that 3DHP would be more of a a fresh approach when there's such old legacy line work. 3DHP, 3D, drive, we really want to see more and more drive time hydrography, and it's going to be a tough sell in Minnesota. We want to use the concept of elevation drive hydrography as being a fresher start. How is that being addressed?
Well, yeah, I mean, I again, you probably tuned into earlier editions of this program, and we had originally wanted to start with that more of a clean slate approach, but we heard from a number of stakeholders that it was going to be challenging for them to work from multiple data sets, right? And so having most of a state in the NHD and a couple hydrologic units, maybe of EDH, and having that sort of parallel data structure exist for a number of years was going to cause workflow problems. Yet also, I mean, this change also benefits, makes some things harder. Again, going back to that sort of sequential data development issue, it makes some things easier too, in terms of having a reliable source for names, for example. I think the key will be really in terms of spatial metadata, so that we'll be able to know where that data is essentially pre-EDH data and where it's post-EDH data. And I expect we'll see, we're not quite there yet, but I expect we'll see status graphics similar to what 3DHP generated that show, hopefully show a nation gradually filling in blue as we get more and more of these EDH projects up.
Yeah, it's really important because we, the stewards, we have to market support behind this. We have to be go to decision makers and say, we as a state need to rally behind this because changes are coming. And when they see maps that's going to incorporate 90% of existing data at high levels, like a statewide perspective, we will no doubt have people sit back in their chair and say, well, what's the problem? Look at all this hydrography that's mapped in Minnesota. It looks like we're good to go. So I hope that we have very distinct attribution in there that allows folks to separate out and identify old from new. And then I'll stop here soon, but I want to say that I think your analogy of using the 3DHP map is spot on. I have personally used the USGS 3DHP status map, that green map that we've all seen. My team and I, we were able to use that map and demonstrate that Minnesota was this very much a white area, meaning that all of our LIDAR data was out of compliance for meeting LIDAR minimum base specification. So we use it as a tool, and I wanted to do the very same thing in the state of Minnesota. And it's going to be difficult if at a national map scale perspective anyway, shows Minnesota flush with hydrography in a new program. I'll stop there. Thanks for the opportunity.
No, we had many of these same kind of conversations, and we will. I think all we're, I will promise you, we will do our best to define those differences, right, and identify where the data meets specification and where the data are, again, as you say, 50, 60, 70 years old. Okay.
Any other questions for Steve?
Yes, excuse me. This is Brett Thomasy with Certex.
Yeah, hi, Brett.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
Good.
Good. Hey, real quick, I was wondering if you could provide an update on the status of the FY23 BAA as it pertains to both LIDAR and EDH type projects.
So I'm going to pass that one to Sue Budo, I think is on the line and is handling our acquisition stuff.
Hi, Brett. How you doing?
Good.
So I will say the 3DHP BAA is out and active, and they're reviewing / accepting proposals as we speak. The 3DHP did receive a fairly small, but still we got one appropriation in this year's budget.
Okay.
So we are working to try to stand up a BAA this fiscal year, but I can't make any promises because we do have a little bit of, I'll say, bureaucratic stuff to go through with respect to approvals to move that forward. If we can't get it done, you know, we're going to have to cut off our timeline based on USGS requirements for, you know, getting a task order in place and getting agreements in place with partners. So if we can't release a BAA this fiscal year, we will do our best to release one next fiscal year on the assumption that that appropriation will continue in the federal budget. Does that
okay? Yeah, thank you very much. That's helpful.
Awesome, thanks.
Any other questions for Sue or Steve? All right, then we'll move along. Mr. Barlow, are you on the line?
I am.
Take it away.
Okay. So I work for the U.S. Geological Survey, for those who may not know me. And I am in the user engagement group for the geospatial liaisons. And when I was acting supervisor last summer, I like to take on a project. And one of the things that we came up with was a culvert attribution and core attributes investigation to try and look at the core common attributes that everybody's using. Now, we had our first meeting last Friday the 13th, and we ended up going a bit sideways, but still a useful exercise. And first of all, let me name the participants, and several who are on the call here: Cindy, Rachel, and Mitch Bergeson, and Eliza Gross, and George Helene was on there, and Elaine Gadaro, Dave Nail, and Luke Sturdivant from New England Water Science Center. So, and Ricardo Lopez, who is very key. Ricardo and I been working together for 33 years. One of the things that we really keyed in on was the existing database for culvert data that the National Aquatic, and the acronym is, but it's Connectivity Collaborative, I think is the CC part. This is a data set, a database that's out of UMass in Amherst, and has a collection of incomplete data, but for a number of states across the north or eastern part of the nation anyhow. And one of the suggestions that Ricardo made, and he is going to engage with the NAACC folks, is to see if we can convince them to adopt the 3DHP ID for their culvert and stream model. And this would enable us to locate culverts a lot easier and go forward with having people submit culverts to there, and then potentially having 3DHP harvest them, the ones that aren't found by the EDH process. And the other aspect of this is that we fully recognize that new and undocumented culverts are going to be found by the EDH process wherever that occurs, as the most prominent form of finding those blockages in stream flow. So engaging with them to use their to use the 3DHP stream reaches, and installing culverts there kind of bypasses the immediate need for a common core attribution scheme. But I think standards is the way to go in the long term. It's better to have a standard for culvert data that everybody can use. And this goes particularly to integrating data from different culvert sources so that we can have a common attribute schema to integrate data from across state lines into same watersheds, that type of outcome or a goal. So we looked at a number of schemas, and we have an initial grouping that I'm not sharing here at this moment, but we are looking at common attributes just as a recommendation. And I think, Linda, you were talking about not standards so much, but business practices. So we're working and coordinating with NSGIC on this effort. Our group is going to meet again in later February, and we'll get a report on any interaction with the NAACC. And I'll be reporting back from the interaction here with NSGIC as to interest and suggestions on what our direction is in looking at culvert attributes and working with existing databases that have culvert information. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Roger. There is a question in the chat. I'll take a stab at it and see if you want to correct me. But Rick asked if you're mapping culverts outside of a stream reach. Rick, both of these are more inventory efforts, what's happening out there, and what Roger's is particularly, the USGS effort is particularly focused on attributes, and we'll be looking at techniques. So neither is actually a mapping initiative. Is that correct, Roger?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Right now, we're just looking at the construction of, and from my standpoint, I haven't actually looked at the NAACC, but I think there are probably culverts that are not on streams there. And I wanted to mention one more thing, and this is a real fly in the ointment, but a number of state schemas are point files, and that simply is not going to work for any stream representation when we are trying to do connectivity. So our recommendation, our strong recommendation would be at some point converting point files that are culverts to vectors.
Thanks, Roger. And in the next presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Phil has a question about NAACC only covering 13 states. However, it still is a good repository of data, right, that we can draw from.
Right. And I think Ricardo said there's another like organization in the southeastern part of the country. So we'll be chasing that down to see what other organizations are like this or similar, and be bringing that forward to NSGIC.
Good. Thank you, Roger. Anything, any other questions for Roger and about their effort?
Linda, this is Sean Vaughn from Minnesota. Rick is my colleague, and I understand why he asked the question about mapping outside of the NHD line work. I think one of the things that can be confusing is how we talk about this. And Linda, when you chimed in and said, you gave a distinction between these different efforts. One of the things that confuses me right off the bat is just a point of suggestion. Looking at the slide on screen, it says culvert mapping. So, you know, to me, this sounds like the beginning of a culvert standard, of an inventory of culvert inventories to see what's out there to identify those commonalities. But what we're trying to do in the state of Minnesota, and it's one that I have to remind myself all the time, is we are trying to develop a culvert standard, because everybody's mind instantly goes to a culvert inventory, and we need a standard in place before we can have a culvert inventory.
Yes, so I agree. It's not a mapping initiative so much as trying to find and promulgate a thought of standards and looking at common attributes and common labeling for those attributes. And the labeling varies greatly between states and local jurisdictions even.
Thank you, Sean. We have struggled. You have hit a sore spot. We have struggled what to call all of this. So I think just some culvert mapping R&D is what we started out with, and I'll just go back to that for this purpose. But this is all information gathering and processing. So, and again, D is probably inappropriate here because we're not developing. So you're spot on with that comment. If it's okay, I'll go ahead and start talking a little bit about then what NSGIC is going to be doing in support of the 3DHP work we're doing with USGS. When we started this project, we did an inventory of what are the critical factors affecting folks as we move towards 3DHP. And the need for culvert data and other subsurface drainage was identified as key because those are going to have to integrate with the data model. And so that's one of the reasons we took this on, is it emerged from the critical factors. So just want to make the point, when we ask you guys these inventories and to contribute, we do really depend on that information to help drive our activities. So this comes out of the critical factors dialogue. The objectives of the NSGIC initiative, we're calling it culvert mapping activities and approaches, is we want to identify strategies that support the enhancement of state hydrography data and hydrologic and hydraulic modeling. We want to educate this group about activities that can be performed in preparation for the development of 3DHP. And we want to inform the 3DHP program about state needs with respect to the integration and application of those locally derived culvert data. And ultimately, we want to develop a set of best practices, i.e. don't map your, culverts mapped as lines are much more functional than culverts mapped as points for use by stakeholders in developing culvert data that best integrates with 3DHP. And so, as Roger said, a culvert mapping standard or a minimum base standard would be extremely useful, but we saw this, that was beyond the NSGIC scope and capability. So we saw this as a first step. Like, let's just kind of talk about, as the 3DHP program is evolving and we're working with stakeholders in the states. And again, we realize that a lot of this mapping is happening in regional governments or in private sector and things like that. As this activity is going, let's learn from this lesson and then evolve with the program. So our first step in this activity is a culvert mapping activity inventory. And you can see the general content here is we want to know what the intent of your project is. Is it just, is it for flood mapping purposes? Is it for hydrologic modeling? Is it just for stream gauging, whatever? So what is the intent of the purpose? What's the geographic extent? And who are the organizations actually collecting the data? Is this happening? Is this state highway folks that are just picking up this information as they're out in the field, et cetera? Again, the feature type, are you using a point, line, polygon, or other to collect the data? Are you manually just getting folks to note these things down on a map? Are you using a GPS system to locate them? Or are you deriving them from existing data resources? What kinds of culverts are you capturing? Are you getting all culverts, or only those that are state road crossings, or only those within your purvey? Those kinds of things. Again, what attributes, and this will complement the work that's going on at USGS. Are you using any standards in the do you have a state standard? Do you have a regional standard? Are you using mapping standards? What standards are you using with regards to the approach? And what software are you using for both capturing the data and then compiling the data? Then we're going to ask just a few questions about what's the status of the project, is the data available, and do you have any links available to related resources that you might be using? So it's a pretty short and sweet survey. Here's the key points. We're going to announce the URL tomorrow to the interest group. So you'll get an announcement if you're in the 3D interest group. Please distribute it to your community, because we know you guys may not be the ones doing the mapping, but you know the people doing the mapping. So this needs to be distributed. It's open to all, state, regional, federal, private, anybody that's doing culvert mapping. We'd like to know more about those activities. And any responses we can get between now and February 21st are going to help us. We're going to compile that initial information and present that at the NSGIC mid-year meeting. So anything we can get by February 24th is quite appreciated. We will likely continue, leave the survey open after that for continued responses, but you're going to see more than one email about contributing to this effort. And with that, I'd like to open up for questions, comments, folks that are going to, if you've got a culvert mapping activity and you'd like to contribute it, contribute information, we'd love to hear from you. What's going on where you work? You guys know I will call on people, right? Look at all those muted microphones. Well, we were fortunate to have a presentation from Rick and team at Minnesota at our last interest group, at our last forum. So I guess I'll throw it to them first. Minnesota, is this something you can jump in and provide some information? Are there things that we should also be capturing about these activities that you're not seeing on the screen?
Well, this is Sean. I was gonna let Rick jump in. So Rick, are you hesitant to jump in?
No, I was waiting for you.
All right.
I was also thinking in my head, so I was like, okay, a lot of information. Well, I could state what Minnesota is kind of doing at the current time. We are moving forward with trying to develop a culvert data standard, looking at multiple data sets across the state with both regional SWCDs, soil and water conservation districts, counties, state agencies, trying to pull together a bunch of data sets and look at common attributes, probably put them into containers such as environmental core attributes, inspection. We're following off something that Wisconsin kind of did with their WICD program. If Jim G is on the call, he could speak to that. But kind of creating a standard of if we're going to collect data, and eventually we kind of work towards what we would consider a state database of culverts. We know there's a lot of counties that have culverts already mapped, but we want to see what they have for attributes. And similar to what you're talking about, is it a point file or is it a feature or a line file? And then also our fisheries in the state. Somebody brought up a point about mapping for fish barrier tracking. Within the Department of Natural Resources, we have a application that works on like estuaries field mapping that people can go out and collect. A lot of our hydrologists go out and use it for determining whether culverts are perched, how fish passages influenced by those. So those, we have a long form which encompasses about 80 attributes. They don't collect every single one of those, but they have the option to collect those. So, and then as people that work with digital elevation models, we also look at some of this data as in terms of modifying the DEM to create that line work, which eventually would be similar to a 3D hydrography product. So Sean, do you want to add anything to that? I kind of threw out a lot of things there, but
it was a good overview, Rick. I would add one thing for everyone to consider, and Linda, as you're gathering all this information, one of the biggest hurdles that we had to overcome in the state of Minnesota is folks within various agencies holding on to their data, their attributes, because they don't have a strong understanding of how in the geospatial community we can link other unique attributes to this. In other words, the commonality for a culvert inventory begins with where is the culvert? Then it often goes to what is the culvert and all these other very key common attributes, but there's folks out there with very specific business needs tied to attributes. Those of us in the geospatial community need to be aware that we have to do some education through this process to help our colleagues not familiar with how we can link attributes in. And so if you don't do that, they're going to pull back. They're not going to let you get their data because they are going to be reluctant to share. And so we need to be prepared to work with the diversity of these different business applications out there and demonstrate how we can incorporate all that even if it's outside of the core attributes that are identified in these culvert inventory processes. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And yes, I think that's, again, these best practices are how, I think that's an excellent one that might come out of this, is how do you reach out and, bring those folks into the fold and bring their data into the fold. I'm seeing some notes in the chat from Kentucky. James, do you want to share a little bit about, oh, you're going to share it on your list server. Thank you very much. I see Patrick Wilkie talking about some DOT culvert mapping. Patrick, you want to talk to the group just for a sec? And Jim G, I see you're out there, so don't think you're getting away with anything.
So yeah, we've had Mitch and I talked about this, and then also we still have a group that gets together monthly to talk about LiDAR and other things. Right now, the big topic is hydro enforcement and conditioning for specific uses and across the state. And so one of the things that did come up is asking, what data the DOT has, and then how, from a culvert perspective, which they have quite a bit, because it's being pushed up to their system from county engineers, but also how we could derive, and it's being stored at a point location, but we're just coming up with a methodology that we'd also, if there is not a road width, or sorry, if there's a point location, how we could turn that into some linear feature based on road center lines and road width, and trying to do that if necessary to adapt that data from their business need to USGS needs. And then the second part of that is that conversation. Part of our state LiDAR working group are the folks who work on the agricultural conservation practices framework, which is a USDA ARS tool, Ag Research Station tool that allows field scale conservation practicing, and does a lot of practice modeling and planning, and does modeling at a Huck 12 level of surficial water flow. And so there's a lot of opportunity to create data from at that level, including a lot of the stuff at the upper reaches, but also the ability to insert different cut line types and that sort of thing. And so one of the questions I asked yesterday is, like, if there was a standard, how easy would it be to adapt and put that, set of domain values into those tools to attribute them accordingly. And the plan is for those, both the DOT data and the ACPF data, for any sort of vector features, to push them up to some state repository at ISU.
Wow. Okay. You're going to fill out the form, right?
I probably will not, but I will send it to the appropriate people. Okay.
I can depend on you.
Yes.
Jim Gigliano, Jim G, added a link to a document in the chat. Jim, would you like to tell us what that document is and what you guys, I know you guys have a community of practice, don't you?
Oh my God, yes.
Oh.
We've gone about things a little bit differently. Our culvert activities started back in 2017 with, we have a lot of interaction with NOAA's Office of Coastal Management. And they had this grand mapping summit in Chicago. And we decided to have one up in Ashland, which is on Lake Superior. And the big topic was culvert inventories, because they have had 3,000-year rainfall events since 2012. And so the folks there have been replacing the same culverts over and over and over again. And it's just a big topic of discussion. And so we jumped right in and started, as Rick mentioned, started collecting inventories and trying to come up with their sort of common fields. And Howard Verrigan, our state cartographer, had this really nice idea of not, forcing them into one sort of schema. We just sort of mashed everything together. And there's 22 different inventories. There's some 270,000 points because everybody collects points. And they're from all over. They're from Minnesota. There's some from Iowa. There's some from Michigan. There's the Great Lakes Stream Crossing Inventory, which is real popular. There's the Fish Works, which is very similar to the the North American something that Roger was talking about. So our approach is very much just trying to collect everything that's out there and trying to figure out which culverts are the same in each inventory. And because the project was very much about washouts and rebuilding, it was very much focused on local level projects and helping small road departments to collect their own data. And so we've done lots of workshops and things like that to try to build interest in it. That's an ongoing project, and happy to share any information about it. Patrick mentioned ACPF, which is a conservation practice tool. We use that a lot to create the hydro-enforced DEMs. We start with our culvert inventory, and we go in and physically draw the vector lines where the culverts are, using our LiDAR and imagery as the the photo interpretation tools. And then we also have our local GIS orthoimagery data provider, Ayers and Company, has a very interesting product that they sell our county GIS programs. It's basically culvert inventory. They do a similar thing where they're photo interpreting the lines, and then they create a hydro enforced DEM. And they've probably done about a third of the state this way. And so, they do a very good job. They've done, a typical county, when you start counting all the driveways and field entrances and things like that, it's 30 to 50,000 culverts. And they roughly charge around $1 a culvert. So it's a very interesting approach. And we're hoping to capitalize on that when we get around to, doing something about our 3DHP, which, is a whole nother story. So briefly, that's what's going on here. And we do like to talk to our neighbors in Michigan, Minnesota, and Iowa, and figure out what they're doing. I'll stop there. Gee, did I just die and go to heaven? Linda?
Nothing like that.
No, I forgot to unmute myself. I'm just working away over here.
Okay.
Before, I don't want to dive into the culvert versus cut line discussion right now. You guys can see the notes in the chat. That is definitely a topic that, well, we've touched on it before and we'll touch on it again, I'm sure. So you're welcome to check that. But anybody else like to have anything they'd like to contribute as far as activities they're doing, or suggestions? I guess that's really key. Do you have suggestions for the survey, what to do, what not to do? Well, it certainly is adaptable. So, oh, go ahead, please.
Just thought of something. This is Mitch. How about a geographic extent? Was that in there?
Yeah, that's part of our project description is why are you doing it? And it's a temporal extent too. We're actually asking, you know, how long is this initiative? Is this like Jim, they've been doing it since 2017 and continue to collect data, or is it a sort of an acute thing? Yes, and Joanne says, please leave some open-ended questions. I will say every question has a comments field to it. So we really want people, if you need to elaborate, if something doesn't fit nicely into great point, a notch into a specific question, feel free to add information. We're also looking to, as I mentioned, links to related resources. So Jim, I know Jim G offered his document, but those are the kinds of things that would also be useful. So anyhow, that's what's coming down the pike. That's what we're working on. We're glad to be sort of coordinating with USGS on this effort. And as just to reiterate, you know, they're really focused on what is that minimum set of attributes, and we're kind of looking at a bigger picture of how are you doing it, and then having a post dialogue about, well, what have we learned here? What's been more what would folks recommend as far as best practices having done this effort? So unless there's any more questions about the culvert mapping. The culvert mapping thing, Sean, shoot me an idea on what we should call it, this culvert mapping thing. We have an inventory, but
Sure. Well,
okay, I did want to just touch briefly on what's happening at the NSGIC Midyear Meeting. It's 3DHP, and we've also got there'll be 3DEP activities as well, because NSGIC is designated one day of the Midyear Meeting as a Fed Day, and they have and so that morning of Fed Day is focused on 3DHP and 3DEP. So I just wanted to give you guys some insights as to what's going on. We will have our Data for the Nation breakfast that morning, and we're not going to have a specific activity, but we definitely would like people come prepared to talk about. Just share your news. What have you achieved? What are you looking to achieve? What new opportunities have you found? Anything. So we'll have just an open conversation during breakfast. We will have a update on the federal 3D hydrography program and the 3D elevation program. I'm happy to say that Steve Achel will be able to join us. Sue, unfortunately, will not. And Steve is giving that presentation. All of these are tentative. Nothing's been accepted yet. We are also looking to have a panel on building state hydrography data and coalitions. The idea is, and Sean just absolutely touched on it, this need that we're going to have to think more broadly than traditionally when it comes to this, because there's lots of organizations, units, agencies that are not our usual suspects who are involved in this and have good and rich resources. And so we're going to try to put together a panel to get folks to talk about those cooperative approaches to adapting and enhancing their hydrography in preparation for 3DHP. And that could be EDH mapping, it could be culvert mapping, it could be all kinds of things, but trying to take a broader perspective on how this work happens. If you're interested, if you're going to be at NSGIC Midyear and you're interested in participating in that panel, please let me know. We have 2 panelists so far, but we do have room for a couple more. So please reach out if you're interested in participating. We're also going to talk a little bit about 3DEP data management resources. For those of you that are not engaged with the 3DEP Interest Group, Phil has put together a fantastic, incredibly well-researched document about available 3DEP data products and associated applications. And he's turned that into a community FAQ, and we're going to encourage you all to contribute towards that FAQ. Phil, if you have a chance and you're able, can you stick that link into the chat? I should have put it on the slide. But Phil's going to be talking about that and talking about how folks can contribute and participate with that. You might have seen an email from him. He's looking for some folks that have had some experiences just to talk in advance to populate the FAQ so we can show how this will work as a community resource. And then we will be talking again about the culvert mapping strategies and attributes. We have, and maybe that's the name. Fortunately, Roger Barlow is going to be able to join us. So while he introduced the efforts here, he's going to have some preliminary results he can share with us at the meeting. And as I mentioned, with our inventory, we hope to have preliminary results too. So that is our strategy for NSGIC mid-year meeting. We truly hope to see you there. If you are attending and would be able to participate or would like to contribute towards any of these activities, please let me know. That meeting is February 26th through March 2nd in Pittsburgh. Where else do you want to be the last week of February? Any questions about mid-year? Any volunteers? All right, well, with that, oh, I'm missing, Emily, don't make the chat go away yet because I'm catching up on notes here.
No worries, it'll be there.
Okay, Jane asked, will there be any notes reports available on these afterwards? Yeah, we'll certainly have presentations, Jane. So that would be available. And I'm sure it's something we'll continue to talk about in the community. So great point. It's not going to be an isolated discussion. It'll be one of many. And then what else do we have in the chat? Karen's going to be there. She's going to be ready to 3DHP and 3DEP party. And Phil's put the link in the document. Thank you very much, Phil. All right. Unless I'll do a last call for questions, comments. Great group today. I love seeing all these folks on the line. As you know, we hold this forum the third Wednesday of the month. Please put a placeholder on your calendar for this meeting, 3 to 4:30 p.m. And we'll send out registration information. Our next forum is scheduled for February 15th, 2023. And we have a very tentative, we've all decided it'd be a great topic, but we haven't quite enlisted the speaker yet. So the tentative topic for next month is looking at what are those 3DHP products. Steve or Sue, is there anything else you'd like to share with the group before we wrap up?
I know I'm not Steve or Sue, but I do have one thing, but I'll let them speak first.
I don't have anything. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, nothing from me. Thanks.
Cool. Little logistics thing from me in regards to putting placeholders on your calendars. You may or may not be aware that once you register, hopefully you'll see that you receive a confirmation email. And there are these really cool buttons on the bottom of the confirmation email that let you add the event to your calendar. So then it will, and that can be your calendar of choice, whether that's Outlook, Google, I think it even has Yahoo on there. But that will add it'll get that calendar event there for you. All the Zoom information will be there. So I can recommend that as, in my opinion, number one best way to make sure that information's there.
Thank you, Emily. That is an outstanding point. Yes, please do use that feature. Don't just think the information is going to be in the email. I cannot tell you the number of messages I get shortly before the meeting people asking for the link because they have, or the meeting invite and that kind of thing. Not saying anybody's name, Thomas. But yes, please do take advantage of that feature on with the meeting registration invite. Thank you, Emily, so much for bringing that up.
Of course.
Oh, and Josh chimes in. You should be aware there is a National Steward Hydro NSGIC community. And if you are a state steward, or if you know of a state steward, you don't have to be a NSGIC member. There's some strong dialogues going on there. Really rich information about what other stewards are doing with regards to the transition from NHD. Josh and Jane are managing that group, and you can join it. And he's put a link in the chat as to how you can join that. All right. Well, thank you all. And with that, we will say thank you, and we'll see you next month. And hopefully we'll see you in Pittsburgh at the end of next month. Thank you guys for participating today.
Thank you.